Senate Republican Leader Bill Brady, Republican of Bloomington. You came out of that leaders' meeting a lot more upbeat than Senator Cullerton did.
Well, it's a political game here we're in, but the governor faced various challenges. The current budget we're in that he vetoed, knowing it was out of balance, is out of balance. It left a huge backlog of unpaid bills. It imposed a tax on the people of Illinois that has driven businesses out of Illinois. And I think he's come up with a great blueprint. Number one thing, what I'm most optimistic about is it's balanced. This budget is balanced. Secondly, the governor said, hold the line on taxes. He knows that it's difficult to bring Amazon to a state that's going to continue to increase taxes and other companies. So in our meeting today with Speaker Madigan and President Cullerton and Leader Durkin and the governor said, we need to work together in a bipartisan way. I've laid out a blueprint that's balanced. My only absolutes are it's got to be balanced. He's laid one out. I'm sure there are things in this budget that the governor doesn't particularly care for, and there's things that other people don't. But I think it's a good start, and it's a fair and equitable way to get us to a balanced budget.
I think your Republican colleague, Jim Durkin, the House Republican leader, put it this way. This is a starting point. This is where we begin the negotiations for what has to happen to get us through the fiscal year that starts on July 1 of this year.
Yeah. I don't know any governor who's introduced a budget today and had it actually become enacted. So, yes, we need input. We need bipartisan input to make sure we're meeting the bipartisan needs of the state. But it has to be balanced, and there are no gimmicks in this. There is fair and equitable sharing of bringing us into balance, which hopefully will lead us to surpluses that will give us even more money to invest.
Well, you call it balanced. We just had President Cullerton sitting in the chair that you're in now saying that no, this in fact is not. He says that it is a deceptive plan, number one, because there's no way you can roll back the taxes. So let's start there. That this is this just... Yeah. Something that is easy and kind of nice to say to voters before an election, we're going to roll back your taxes some, but it's not feasible.
But this budget is not predicated on rolling back the taxes or pension reforms that would have to meet the test of the Supreme Court. What the governor has done, I think brilliantly, is he said, pass President Cullerton's pension reforms that will save $1 billion, and those monies can be used to roll back the tax. That's off budget. So that idea, President Cullerton's pension reforms, saving $1 billion and giving it back to the taxpayers by reducing the onerous tax that was imposed on them last year. But that's not part of the budget. The budget is based on revenues under current law and then readjusting expenditures, living within our means, and prioritizing our spending, I think, in a fair way.
Is it fair, however, for the governor to constantly criticize the tax increase, talk about vetoing it, and yet have a budget proposal that, as you just noted, relies on that very tax increase?
Well, but he has called off budget for Senator Cullerton's pension reform that would roll that back. The governor's out there trying to be our chief salesman. He's trying to bring Amazon. He's brought other companies here, but he knows it's difficult with the tax increase that was imposed last year. He also knows that the Democrats who passed that tax increase through their budget and their spending plan, and some Republicans, but it was Speaker Madigan's budget. I mean, there's no question about it. We thought we had negotiated a bipartisan program, but at the end of the day, Speaker Madigan passed his budget. Right, wrong, or indifferent, and you're right, some Republicans voted for it. The governor, I think, is being realistic that to roll that tax back was going to require some savings. He's targeted Senator Cullerton's pension reform. He's also targeted programs that Speaker Madigan has proposed before, and that is holding local governments, school districts accountable for costs that they put off on the state. This is something that is a good program because it'll help them manage those costs. But this isn't unique to Republican Governor Bruce Rauner. This is within a proposal that Speaker Madigan has proposed in the past.
Well, in fairness, though, that proposal was phased in over a 14-year period as the money was ramped up for it. You're talking about a 4-year plan now with 25% per year that goes back on to local school districts for the most part.
And I opposed that proposal, and I'll tell you why I opposed that proposal. That also shifted legacy liabilities and costs, which are grand and shouldn't be shifted to local government. This only shifts the cost of the normal cost, which is the current year cost of the pension. So what we did is we took the proposal that Speaker Madigan, or the governor did, and we said, okay, legacy costs aren't fair. It's not fair to ask those school districts, as Speaker Madigan was doing over 14 years, to pay that $130 billion in unfunded liability. But it is fair for them to manage salaries, realizing the salaries have a pension cost associated with them.
But if you look at this from the standpoint of, let's say,
But
someone in
look,
down...
can I go back to
Okay,
that for a minute?
Please, go
Even
ahead.
with that, the governor is increasing education funding to offset that cost by over $350 million in accordance with the education reform package that we passed last year. So it's not like he's just saying, pay this, forget everything else. Increasing funding by $350 million plus dollars.
But at the same time, local school districts are going to have to fork over more money for that, putting more of the burden back on the local property tax owners or property taxpayers. And we're already neck and neck with New Jersey and having the highest property taxes in the country.
You're right. But the increase in funding exceeds the local school district's realization of the phase-in of the normal costs.
How will you get particularly Democrats from Chicago to be on board with that, considering that just passed education funding proposal catches CPS up with all the other school districts in the state? They have their own legacy costs that Illinois will keep on carrying under this proposal for other school districts, but not for CPS, while putting this new burden back onto CPS right away.
Well, it's a matter of equity. Those legacy costs were created when Chicago Public Schools wanted to have their own pension system and didn't want the state to touch it. So that was decided, and money was given to Chicago for pensions in past years in other ways to meet those obligations to provide equity. But having said that, I think it's a fair and equitable program. More money goes to education than ever before. That helps the city of Chicago. That helps the rest of the state. It balances our budget. If Chicago wants to grow and attract companies like Amazon, we have to have a balanced budget. And we have to have a plan to reduce the property tax burden and the income tax burden. This budget provides that.
One of the things that President Cullerton touched on a little earlier was, he said some of these things will be very difficult for downstate Republicans to vote for, like taking, let's say, the insurance premium negotiations out of collective bargaining negotiations. There are a lot of union employees who vote Republican at correctional centers and state garages and the like downstate. How are you going to sell that?
Well, I think you sell it by saying this is commensurate with private sector health plans. It is commensurate with the average, I believe, of other public sector health plans. And it's fair. I mean, we're not shifting. The state is still maintaining the majority cost of the health insurance plans for state employees. This is very fair and reasonable, I believe. And by helping realize the management cost of these health insurance programs, I think in the long run it's going to give more freedom to state workers because there will be more money to increase pay in other areas.
What about for retired teachers and other retired state employees, ratcheting down the amount that the state pitches in for their premiums?
Yeah, this isn't easy. There's a lot of programs in here. I authored the first teachers retirement system health insurance plan way back when. I don't like to see the challenges we're facing affect that adversely. But we were left with over $2 billion in a structural deficit. I think the governor's approach, although I don't agree with all of it, I think the governor's approach is fair and balanced. And I think it will give us a good starting blueprint for the General Assembly to work with the administration to come up with a balanced budget in a timely fashion if my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to work together. I think the governor showed that he wants to work together by reaching out and discussing this today with both Democratic leaders. I think it was a fruitful beginning to a process that we're all going to have to focus on.
Do you doubt that willingness to collaborate?
No, I look at.
I meant by Democrats, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I know Governor Rauner wants to. He wanted to in the education reform that we passed in a bipartisan way. We achieved that. I believe that Speaker Madigan and I believe that President Cullerton want to do that. I don't think anyone wants to go into an election cycle, an election year, without a balanced budget. Are there going to have to be tough decisions like this General Assembly's had to make before? Absolutely. Not everyone's going to be happy. But if we don't make these decisions, I promise you, everyone's going to be a lot more unhappy down the road.
The governor today proposed nearly $8 billion in new capital construction. A lot of that's geared toward universities that have what we call deferred maintenance, which means letting stuff go. Where's the revenue stream for that, Senator?
Well, some of it comes from ongoing capital programs. It's one-time revenues. You could tie it to maybe the Thompson Center sale or other one-time revenues.
Isn't that part of this year's budget already, though?
Well, we've conceded pretty much that that's not going to happen this year. So it's been put off to the next year, hoping we can pass. And I think I had Democrats tell me, yes, we need to sell the Thompson Center down on the floor today. And so those expenditures. But what the governor has realized is, I think rightly so, Governors Blagojevich and Quinn have attacked higher education. Higher education is a foundational value for economic development and job creation. And if we don't reinvest in this tech center on the river of Chicago, is going to be one of the most fantastic opportunities I think we have for job creation. Businesses are looking for that. We have to better leverage our institutions of higher education. And it's not just Chicago, by the way. It's Rockford, Peoria, Springfield, other communities that will benefit from this, but all of higher ed will benefit. The governor realizes that our students, our young adults in our state needs that boost for higher education.
Doesn't the governor and Republicans wear a lot of that jacket for also decimating higher education during the budget impasse?
Well, clearly, it was one of the few things the courts didn't rule you had to fund. So it fell by the wayside. But the governor was arguing. But it started under Blagojevich and continued under Governor Quinn.
Senate Republican Leader Bill Brady, thanks for being with us today. Always a pleasure to have you on the program. Always a happy warrior for the Republican cause.
Good to be
here
with you.
Illinois lawmakers.
Thanks, Jack.
Thanks very much, sir.